The metallic tang of blood filled Eleanor Vance's mouth, a phantom taste she had grown accustomed to over long, brutal shifts. Her hands, encased in latex, moved with practiced precision, delving into the chaos within the anonymous man's abdomen. The air in St. Jude's Trauma Center's operating room vibrated with the urgent symphony of beeping monitors, hushed commands, and the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator. Sweat beaded on her brow, trickling towards the edge of her sterile cap, but her focus remained absolute, a tunnel vision on the fragile life beneath her scalpel. This patient had arrived a ghost. No identification, just a bullet wound and the grim, silent faces of the men who had brought him in. They were shadows, slipping away before anyone could get more than a fleeting glimpse. But Eleanor knew this, felt it in her bones. This was no ordinary street casualty. The meticulous, almost reverent way his escorts had watched him, the expensive, dark fabric of his clothes, the quiet authority in their eyes. It all spoke of a world far removed from the usual desperation that flooded their emergency department. She pushed these thoughts aside, her fingers locking around the hemostat, a life depending on her, regardless of who it belonged to. Her breath hitched slightly when the artery finally yielded to her careful repair, the crimson flow stemming, a small victory against the tide of impending death. A surge of professional triumph, quickly tempered by the exhaustion that settled deep in her bones, washed over her. She imagined the brief, cold touch of his skin earlier, clammy with shock, and a strange, unwelcome tremor ran through her. Days bled into a relentless cycle marked by the rising and setting of the Viridian city skyline outside the hospital window. The anonymous patient, now stable, lay sequestered in a private ward, far from the bustling triage. Eleanor had volunteered for his specialized care, drawn by an instinct she couldn't quite articulate. The ward was silent, save for the soft hum of the life support machines and the almost imperceptible rustle of the starched sheets. She found herself spending extra minutes there, adjusting his pillow, checking his vitals, her gaze lingering on his still, intense face. Even in unconsciousness, there was an undeniable power radiating from him, a raw, untamed presence that filled the sterile room. His eyes, when they finally opened, were the color of dark obsidian, sharp and assessing. They held no confusion, only a piercing awareness that seemed to strip away her defenses. A shiver, not of cold but of something far more unsettling, traced a path down her spine. He did not speak, could not yet, his throat still intubated, but his gaze communicated volumes. It was a silent conversation, a strange, profound connection forged in the crucible of life and death. Eleanor would speak to him gently, explaining procedures, describing the mundane details of the outside world, a world he seemed to have only just returned from. She found herself sharing little anecdotes from her day, small, insignificant moments, feeling a desperate need to fill the echoing silence of the room. She wondered if he listened, if he understood, if her words penetrated the veiled intensity of his stare. Each time her fingers brushed his skin while adjusting the IV line or changing a dressing, a spark, dangerous and electric, jumped between them. The sterile air seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken tension, a palpable current that left her heart racing and her palms faintly damp. As the days turned into weeks, his recovery became a testament to his sheer resilience. The tubes came out, the bandages lessened, revealing sharp, angular features and a faint scar near his temple. He began to speak, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent another shiver through Eleanor. His words were few, clipped, direct. "You saved me," he had stated one evening, his dark eyes boring into hers. It was not a question, nor a thank you, but a statement of undeniable fact, delivered with a weight that made the air heavy. Eleanor felt a flush rise to her cheeks under his unwavering gaze, a strange mixture of pride and unease. One afternoon, while she was adjusting the drip, she noticed it again, a heavy antique gold signet ring on his right pinky finger, intricately carved with a snarling lion's head. It was a small detail, but it pulsed with an undeniable, archaic power. She had seen similar designs in hushed reports, whispered rumors that occasionally infiltrated the tightly sealed world of the hospital staff. Her attention was drawn from the ring to the subtle, well-trained movements of the men who guarded his door, always two, always impeccably dressed, always silent. Their presence had become a permanent fixture, an unnerving backdrop to his recovery. One evening, as she approached the ward, she overheard a fragment of conversation from the two guards stationed outside. "The boss is recovering faster than expected," one murmured, his voice low, almost reverent. "Dominic will be pleased." The name, Dominic, hit her like a physical blow, a sudden icy wave washing over her. Her heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She paused, her hand hovering near the doorknob, listening intently, her breath held captive in her chest. Then, another voice, deeper, more guttural, responded, "He's lucky Nurse Vance was on duty. No one else could have pulled him back from that brink." The words were chilling, confirming her nascent fears. Dominic Rossi, the notorious, ruthless Mafia boss of Viridian City. The name echoed in the deepest recesses of her mind, a stark, terrifying revelation. Her stomach churned with a sudden, sickening jolt. All the whispers, the hushed reports she had dismissed as sensational gossip, now coalesced into a horrifying truth. Her patient, the man whose life she had painstakingly saved, the man with whom she had developed this intense, unspoken connection, was a predator, a king in the city's hidden underworld. A cold dread settled over her, chilling her to the bone. The sterile white walls of the private ward suddenly felt like the bars of a cage trapping her in a dangerous secret. She remembered his dark, probing eyes, his quiet intensity, and a sickening wave of fear washed over her. Her compassion, her unwavering professional duty, had led her directly into the path of a monster. She felt a profound sense of violation, a chilling awareness of the power imbalance that had always existed, now laid bare and stark. The warmth she had felt, the strange pull towards him, now twisted into something ugly, something she despised. Her hands trembled slightly as she finally pushed open the door, her face a carefully constructed mask of professional calm. His dark eyes met hers, and for a fleeting moment, she imagined she saw a flicker of something knowing, something predatory, beneath his placid expression. His full recovery was remarkably swift, a testament to his formidable will and the expert care she had provided. The day he was discharged, the ward felt eerily quiet. The constant presence of his men, the tension, the unspoken intimacy, all vanished with his departure. A strange emptiness settled over Eleanor, a void where his intense gaze and silent strength had been. She told herself it was relief, a dangerous burden lifted, but a flicker of something else, a hollow ache, remained. She found herself replaying their quiet moments in her mind, his low voice, the way his hand had briefly covered hers once when he was struggling to sit up. She dismissed it as fatigue, as the lingering stress of her demanding job, but the echoes of his presence lingered, a persistent whisper in her thoughts. The following weeks were a blur of shifts, coffee, and an increasing sense of unease. A dull ache settled in her lower back, her energy flagged, and the smell of the cafeteria coffee, usually a comfort, now turned her stomach. She attributed it to exhaustion, to the lingering stress of that intense period. Eleanor, ever pragmatic, thought little of it, pushing through the fatigue with grim determination. Then came the nausea, sudden and debilitating, hitting her in waves throughout the day, especially in the mornings. Her usually sharp mind, preoccupied with patient charts and medication dosages, struggled to piece together the unfamiliar symptoms. One morning, while preparing for her shift, a profound wave of dizziness swept over her, forcing her to lean against the cool bathroom tiles. Her eyes, tired and unfocused, caught her reflection in the mirror. A faint pallor, a subtle softening around her waistline, the almost imperceptible hint of a glow she had seen in countless new mothers. A cold, dread-filled certainty bloomed in her stomach, a flower of absolute terror. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. It couldn't be, it was impossible. She, Eleanor Vance, the meticulous, careful trauma nurse, could not have been so utterly careless. Her hands, usually so steady, fumbled through the drawer, pulling out the familiar white box. The instructions blurred before her eyes, but she knew them by heart. The waiting was agony, every second stretching into an eternity. The world outside her small apartment seemed to recede, replaced by the deafening sound of her own heartbeat and the terrifying silence of the tiny plastic stick. When the two lines appeared, stark and undeniable against the white background, a guttural cry escaped her lips. The sound was raw, filled with a primal terror and disbelief. Her knees buckled, and she slid to the cold bathroom floor, the flimsy plastic test clutched in her trembling hand. Pregnant. She was pregnant. The words echoed in her mind, hollow and terrifying, and the father unequivocally could only be him. Dominic Rossi, the man she had saved, the man she had allowed herself in a moment of unimaginable weakness and isolation to connect with, the memories of their strange, intense encounters in that private ward, the subtle touches, the electric glances, the unspoken tension, now twisted into a grotesque, horrifying reality. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of frantic, desperate thoughts. How could this happen? How could she have been so naive, so foolish, so utterly blind? A burning shame washed over her, hot and stinging, mixed with an overwhelming wave of fear. The room began to spin, the walls closing in on her, suffocating her with the enormity of her predicament. She had saved a monster, and in doing so had irrevocably tied herself to his dangerous world. The baby, this tiny, nascent life growing within her, was a part of him, a living, breathing connection to the very darkness she abhorred. Tears streamed down her face, hot and relentless, blurring her vision. She felt a profound sense of betrayal, not just by circumstance, but by the subtle manipulations, the unspoken power dynamics that had played out in that sterile room. He had known who he was, and she, in her professional dedication, had been utterly blind. The image of Dominic's dark, commanding eyes, his possessive gaze, flashed in her mind. He was a man who took what he wanted, a man who commanded absolute loyalty and control. What would he do when he found out? The thought sent another shiver of terror through her. Her child, his child, would be born into that world of violence, of power, of unforgiving shadows. Her entire life, dedicated to healing and preserving life, now stood on the precipice of ruin, threatened by the very man she had saved. The world she knew, the safe, predictable routine of her nursing life, shattered around her. Her fingers instinctively went to her neck, finding the cold metal of her tarnished silver locket. It was an old piece, a relic from her mother, a symbol of a simpler, safer past. She clutched it tight, the sharp edges digging into her palm, seeking comfort, seeking an answer that wouldn't come. Her mind screamed for a solution, a way out, any way out. She could not, would not allow her child to be raised in that terrifying, brutal existence. She had to protect this vulnerable life, even if it meant sacrificing everything she knew. A fierce, desperate resolve began to harden within her, pushing through the initial shock and despair. There was only one path, one terrifying, impossible decision. She would disappear. She would vanish without a trace, taking her secret and her unborn child away from Viridian City, far away from Dominic Rossi and his suffocating, dangerous world. The thought was daunting, terrifying, but it was also a glimmer of hope, a desperate act of self-preservation. She would protect her child, no matter the cost, no matter the fear that clawed at her heart. The cold dread of her secret settled deep into Eleanor's bones, a constant, heavy weight. Her heart still pounded with the memory of the two pink lines, a stark revelation that had shattered her carefully ordered world. She had saved a man's life, only to find herself carrying his child, a child conceived in a gilded cage, by a man she knew only as Dominic Rossi, the city's unseen ruler. He was a shadow, a threat, and now, undeniably, the father of her unborn child. The fear was a living thing inside her, whispering that her only choice was to vanish, to protect this new life from the darkness she had inadvertently touched. Her small apartment, once a haven of quiet comfort, now felt like a trap, every corner holding the ghost of her former, naive self. Eleanor began to move with a quiet, desperate efficiency. She sifted through her possessions, deciding what was essential and what needed to be shed. The process felt like an amputation, severing ties to a life she could no longer afford to live. She sold her car, a reliable but conspicuous sedan, exchanging its familiar hum for a stack of cold, hard cash. Its new owner, a young woman with a bright smile, knew nothing of the desperate flight this transaction funded. Eleanor watched her drive away, a strange mix of relief and profound loss washing over her. She liquidated her modest savings, the digital numbers on the screen transforming into crisp new bills, a tangible form of her vanishing act. Each financial transaction felt like another nail in the coffin of Eleanor Vance, the trauma nurse of St. Jude's. The smell of printer ink filled her small study as she printed out bank statements, utility bills, and medical records, ensuring no digital breadcrumbs remained. Her fingers, usually so steady during delicate procedures, trembled slightly as she shredded old documents, watching the strips of paper fall like confetti, erasing her existence piece by piece. The most difficult part was saying goodbye, or rather, not saying goodbye to everyone except Sarah. Sarah Jenkins, her best friend and colleague, was the only person Eleanor trusted implicitly, the only one who might understand the impossible choice she had to make. Their conversations became hushed, laden with unspoken anxieties. Eleanor fabricated a story of a sudden job offer in a distant city, a chance for a fresh start, trying to make her voice sound bright and convincing. Sarah's warm brown eyes, usually full of knowing empathy, now held a hint of suspicion, a flicker of concern Eleanor tried to ignore. "You're sure about this, Elle?" Sarah had asked one evening, her voice soft, as they sat on Eleanor's worn sofa. The scent of Sarah's lavender lotion was a comforting presence. "It all feels a bit sudden." Eleanor's grip tightened on the tarnished silver locket she often clutched, a relic from her mother. "It's a good opportunity, Sarah. A change of pace. I need it." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she forced a smile. She could not burden Sarah with the truth, not with the danger Dominic Rossi represented. The weight of her secret pressed down on her chest, a physical ache. She knew Sarah would be heartbroken, perhaps even angry, when she truly disappeared. But protecting her friend from the shadows of Dominic's world felt paramount. Packing was a solitary, heartbreaking ritual. She packed only essentials, practical clothes, her nursing uniform, a few beloved books, and the tarnished silver locket. Each item felt heavy with memory. The scent of her own laundry detergent, usually a comforting smell, now reminded her of a life she was leaving behind. She wrapped the locket carefully in a soft cloth, placing it deep inside her worn backpack, a silent promise to a future she could barely imagine. Her apartment became an echoing shell, stripped of its personality, ready for her to simply walk away. Under the cloak of a moonless night, Eleanor drove away from Viridian City, the sprawling metropolis a receding blur in her rearview mirror. The hum of the rented economy car was a steady companion, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of her thoughts. She had spent weeks researching remote towns online, poring over maps and clinic directories, searching for a place small enough to be overlooked, yet large enough to need a trauma nurse. The chosen town, nestled hours away by a quiet lake, felt like a distant dream, a fragile hope. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as she navigated the unfamiliar roads. The scent of pine trees and damp earth slowly replaced the exhaust fumes and stale city air she had grown accustomed to. Each mile she put between herself and Viridian City was a small victory, a breath of freedom, but it was a freedom laced with profound loneliness. The radio played a soft, unfamiliar melody, a soothing sound in the overwhelming silence of her escape. She caught her reflection in the darkened window, a pale, determined face, a stranger to herself. She drove for what felt like an eternity, the headlights cutting through the inky blackness. Her eyes, usually so sharp, felt heavy with exhaustion. The occasional flash of an oncoming car's high beams made her flinch, a subconscious fear that someone was following, that Dominic's reach was longer than she could ever imagine. She felt the dull ache in her stomach, a constant reminder of the life growing within her, the precious secret she carried. This little one was her reason, her anchor, and her terror. Back in Viridian City, high above the glittering skyline in his opulent penthouse, Dominic Rossi felt a stir of irritation. Eleanor Vance, the nurse who had saved his life, had simply vanished. His dark eyes, usually sharp and penetrating, were clouded with a rare confusion. She was not a woman who made impulsive decisions. He had watched her, observed her quiet grace, her unwavering professionalism. Her sudden disappearance was an anomaly, an affront to his meticulously ordered world. The faint scent of expensive leather and polished wood filled the air, a constant reminder of his power, a power that now felt strangely impotent. "Find her, Marco," Dominic commanded, his voice low and dangerous, the words echoing slightly in the vast, silent space. He stood by the panoramic window, the city lights a glittering tapestry beneath him, yet his gaze was far away, fixed on an unseen horizon. The heavy signet ring on his pinky finger gleamed, the snarling lion's head a symbol of his authority, an authority that had been challenged. Marco Volkov, Dominic's loyal right-hand man, stood impassively, his watchful dark eyes betraying no emotion. "We are searching, boss. Her apartment is empty, her phone disconnected. She left no forwarding address." His voice was calm, efficient, but the undercurrent of frustration was palpable. Marco knew the importance Dominic placed on details, on control. This disappearance was a gaping hole in their intelligence. Dominic turned from the window, his gaze sweeping over Marco, a silent demand for answers. The subtle, faded scar near his temple, a testament to the injury Eleanor had treated, seemed to pulse with a phantom ache. "No one just vanishes, Marco. Not from my city, not when I want them found." His voice remained even, but an undercurrent of ice ran through it. He had grown accustomed to Eleanor's presence, her quiet efficiency during his recovery. He had even found himself looking forward to her calm demeanor, a stark contrast to the usual sycophancy that surrounded him. Her absence left an unsettling void, an unfamiliar irritation that festered within him. Days turned into a week, then two. Dominic's frustration mounted with each report of a dead end. Marco's men, usually so adept at tracking down any target, returned with nothing. No digital footprint, no paper trail, no whispers on the street. It was as if Eleanor Vance had been erased, a ghost in the machine. Dominic paced the length of his penthouse, the expensive carpet silent beneath his footsteps, a restless energy building within him. The city below, usually a source of power and comfort, now felt indifferent, uncooperative. He slammed his fist onto the polished mahogany desk, the sudden sharp sound echoing in the stillness. A crystal decanter of amber liquid trembled slightly. He had grown to expect a certain level of deference, a recognition of his will. This vanishing act felt like a deliberate defiance. Meanwhile, Eleanor, after hours of relentless driving, pulled into a small, nondescript motel parking lot, the gravel crunching beneath her tires. The neon sign, flickering weakly, cast a pale, sickly glow on the peeling paint of the building. Her body ached with fatigue, but her mind was still racing, replaying every step of her escape. She had chosen this place for its anonymity, its distance from any major highway, a temporary refuge before she reached her final destination. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint smell of damp earth and something vaguely metallic. She unlocked the motel room door, the rusty lock groaning in protest. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of cheap disinfectant and old cigarette smoke. The faded floral wallpaper and worn carpet offered little comfort, yet it was a sanctuary, a place where she could finally rest, however briefly. She dropped her backpack onto the worn armchair, the weight of her few belongings a reminder of her precarious new existence. Her stomach churned, a familiar unease growing. Suddenly, a wave of nausea, sharp and violent, seized her. She barely made it to the small, grimy bathroom, collapsing before the toilet. The cold porcelain pressed against her flushed cheek as her body convulsed, emptying its contents. The metallic taste of bile filled her mouth, a harsh, undeniable reality. This was not just fatigue or stress. This was morning sickness, raw and relentless, a brutal affirmation of her new state. Tears streamed down her face, not just from the physical discomfort, but from the overwhelming, isolating reality of her situation. She was alone, utterly and completely, facing this profound change in her body, a world away from anyone she knew. She clutched her swollen abdomen, a fierce, protective instinct washing over her, even through the weakness. This little life stirring within her was all she had now. It was a secret, a burden, but also a fragile, blossoming hope. The sound of her own ragged breathing echoed in the tiny bathroom. The dim light from the motel room seeped under the door, casting long, wavering shadows. She knew with a chilling certainty that her old life was gone, obliterated by this single momentous fact. Eleanor slowly dragged herself back to the bed, the rough motel sheets feeling like sandpaper against her skin. She lay there staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of traffic from the highway outside. Each tremor of nausea, each pang of exhaustion, solidified the reality she had chosen. She was a mother, or would be soon, and she was on the run. The tarnished silver locket felt heavy against her chest, a silent comfort, a connection to a past that felt impossibly distant. She closed her eyes, picturing the quiet lake, the small clinic, the new life she hoped to build, a shield against the dangerous world she had fled. The next morning, the motel room felt even smaller, the air heavier. Eleanor packed her meager belongings, her movements stiff but resolute. The lingering taste of nausea was a constant reminder, a shadow that would follow her. She checked out, avoiding eye contact with the bored clerk, her heart quickening with each public interaction. Every stranger felt like a potential threat, a pair of eyes that might recognize her, might connect her to the life she had desperately abandoned. The faint smell of coffee from the lobby was a small, fleeting comfort. She continued her journey, the landscape slowly transforming from the sprawling suburbs of Viridian City to rolling hills, and then eventually to the tranquil, wooded areas surrounding a large, shimmering lake. The air grew cleaner, carrying the scent of pine and fresh water, a welcome change from the city's polluted breath. The winding roads were less traveled, and the occasional small town she passed through seemed to exist in a different time, far removed from the high-stakes world she had left behind. The silence of the countryside was profound, broken only by the chirping of birds and the gentle rustle of leaves. Finally, after another hour of driving, she saw it. The sign, faded but welcoming, read Lakeside Community Clinic. It was a modest building nestled among tall trees, with a wide, inviting porch. The paint was a soft, muted green, blending harmoniously with its natural surroundings. A gentle breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying the scent of blooming wildflowers. It looked exactly as she had imagined, a haven of quiet anonymity. Eleanor pulled into the small parking lot, the crunch of gravel beneath her tires the only sound. She turned off the engine, and the sudden silence felt immense. A deep breath filled her lungs, tasting of cool, clean air. Her gaze swept over the clinic, then out towards the sparkling expanse of the lake visible through the trees. This was it. This was her new beginning, her desperate gamble for peace. She clutched the tarnished silver locket, a silent prayer forming on her lips, a fervent hope that this quiet place would be her shield, protecting her and the precious life growing within her from the storm she had escaped. The scent of pine and fresh lake air, a stark contrast to the sterile city, now defined Eleanor's days. She moved through the Lakeside Community Clinic with a practiced quietness, her hands steady as she prepared a syringe or checked a patient's pulse. This small clinic, nestled amongst the trees, was a world away from the relentless urgency of St. Jude's Trauma Center. Here, the emergencies were scraped knees and flu symptoms, not gunshot wounds and shattered lives. A fragile peace had begun to settle over her, a thin veneer she clung to with desperate hands. The clinic itself felt welcoming, smelling faintly of herbal remedies and freshly brewed tea rather than the sharp antiseptic sting she knew so well. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, warming the pale yellow walls, a gentle glow that seemed to soothe her frayed nerves. She found a quiet rhythm in the work, the familiar motions a balm to her restless mind. There were no flashing red lights, no hurried shouts echoing through the halls, just the gentle hum of conversation and the occasional cheerful greeting from a passing colleague. Yet, even in this sanctuary, an insistent ache persisted beneath the surface. Each evening, as the clinic emptied and the soft twilight descended, a profound loneliness would creep into her small apartment. The silence, once a comfort, now felt heavy, pressing down on her. She would sit by her window, watching the stars emerge over the dark expanse of the lake, her fingers often tracing the tarnished silver locket at her throat. It felt heavier now, a repository for all the unspoken hopes and fears she carried. The urge to speak, to confide, became a constant companion. She often found herself at her small kitchen table, a cheap pen in hand, paper spread before her. These were not letters to be sent, but rather desperate whispers poured onto the page, addressed to Sarah. "My dearest Sarah," she would begin, "I miss your laugh, your sensible advice." The words flowed, a torrent of guilt and longing. She wrote of the fear that still clutched her heart, the fear of Dominic, of his shadow reaching even this far. Her pen scratched across the paper, detailing the small, quiet victories of her new life, the grateful smiles of her patients, the simple beauty of the surrounding nature. Then the fear would resurface, a cold knot in her stomach. "He hunts me, I know it," she would write, the words appearing stark and accusing on the page. "Every unfamiliar car, every shadow at dusk, it makes my heart leap into my throat." She imagined Sarah's worried frown, her direct questions, the grounding presence she so desperately missed. She never sealed the envelopes, never affixed a stamp. Instead, the letters accumulated in a shoebox under her bed, a secret testament to her profound isolation. It was a tangible connection to the person she had been, a way to process the vast, terrifying distance that now separated her from her past. The paper, rough under her fingertips, absorbed her tears, becoming crinkled and soft with each whispered confession. Sometimes she would reread them, a painful reminder of the life she had sacrificed to protect her unborn child. Her body, though, was undergoing its own quiet transformation, a constant, undeniable reminder of the life growing within her. The morning sickness, once a brutal daily reality, had begun to recede, leaving behind a subtle, persistent hunger. She watched her reflection in the bathroom mirror, observing the gentle curve of her stomach, a secret visible only to herself. A strange blend of awe and terror would wash over her. This was real, this tiny being, a part of her and a part of him. Then came the flutters, faint at first, like the brush of a butterfly wing deep inside her. Eleanor was alone in her small living room reading a medical journal when she felt it, a soft, almost imperceptible tremor. She froze, her breath catching in her throat, her hand automatically flying to her belly. It happened again, a delicate, rhythmic pulse. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and unexpected. This was not a sickness, not a mistake, but a living presence moving within her. A profound connection bloomed in that moment, overwhelming everything else. It was a love so fierce and protective, it stole her breath. She whispered to her stomach, tracing patterns on her skin, a silent conversation with the life she carried. The outside world, with its dangers and its shadows, receded for a precious few minutes. Here, in this quiet room, there was only her and this tiny, undeniable miracle. It was a bittersweet joy, though. The exquisite tenderness of the moment, was always underscored by the sharp, painful knowledge that she faced this journey alone. The baby's movements grew stronger, more insistent, a constant, comforting reminder of her purpose. She would pause her work at the clinic, a small, secret smile touching her lips as a strong kick rippled across her abdomen. Her colleagues, kind and observant, would sometimes ask about her well-being, noticing her occasional faraway look. Eleanor would offer a vague answer, a polite smile, always deflecting, always keeping her secret close. The isolation tightened around her, but the baby's presence was a fierce, bright light within it. Her days were a careful dance between routine and vigilance. She avoided the small town's public spaces during peak hours, preferring to do her grocery shopping in the early mornings when the streets were quiet. Her eyes constantly scanned her surroundings, lingering on unfamiliar faces, on cars that seemed to pass by a little too slowly. Her mind was a constant loop of scenarios, of escape routes, of desperate pleas. She knew deep down that this fragile peace was temporary, a borrowed moment. To maintain this delicate balance, Eleanor had built an invisible wall around herself, meticulously blocking out any news from Viridian City. She deliberately avoided the national news channels, choosing local radio for weather and community updates. The internet, once a source of distraction and connection, now felt like a dangerous portal. She never typed Dominic Rossi's name into a search engine, never scrolled through major city news sites. It was a conscious, painful effort to erase him, to erase the very memory of his intense, dark eyes, his commanding voice, the dangerous magnetism that had drawn her in. Sometimes a fragment of a memory would surface, unbidden. The hushed intensity of his private room at St. Jude's, the feel of his hand gripping hers, the weight of his gaze. A tremor would run through her, and she would quickly reorient herself, focusing on the smell of pine outside her window, the soft texture of her scrubs. She had to believe that by severing all ties, by erasing his presence from her mind, she could somehow make herself invisible to him. It was a desperate hope, fragile as spun glass. The effort was exhausting, a constant mental battle against the past. Her sleep was often restless, filled with fragmented dreams of gleaming city lights and menacing shadows. She would wake with a tea empire, her heart pounding, the locket clutched tight in her hand, only to find herself in her quiet, small room, the lake whispering outside. This new life was a constant exercise in self-control, a performance of normalcy she perfected each day. She laughed at jokes, offered comfort to her patients, and held her head high, all while a storm raged quietly within her. She would often walk down to the lake in the evenings, the cool breeze a welcome respite against her heated skin. The water, dark and mysterious, stretched out before her, reflecting the pale moonlight. It mirrored the vast, unknown future she faced, the depths of her fears, and the shimmering surface of her hopes for the child she carried. She talked to the baby then, her voice a soft murmur, promising a safe, quiet life, a life free from the shadows that haunted her. One slow Tuesday morning, a break in her usual routine, Eleanor found herself in the small staff room, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea. The local newspaper lay open on the worn table, left behind by one of her colleagues. She rarely glanced at it, but her eyes, tired from another night of anxious dreams, fell upon an article on an inside page. It was a small piece, buried amidst local news, about a charity gala in Viridian City. Her breath hitched. The headline was innocuous, mentioning a significant donation to a children's hospital wing. But the location, Viridian City, stood out like a beacon of danger. Her heart began to pound, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She felt a sudden, inexplicable chill, despite the warmth of her tea. Her fingers, usually so steady, trembled as she reached for the paper, her eyes scanning the familiar, elegant font. The name of the donor was not explicitly stated in the brief article, but the sheer mention of the city, the world she had so desperately tried to escape, was enough. A cold dread seeped into her bones. It was as if a tiny crack had appeared in the impenetrable wall she had built around herself. The smell of the clinic, the sound of distant birdsong, the taste of her bland tea, all faded into insignificance. All she registered was the printed word, the distant, shimmering, dangerous city. A vague premonition, a shiver of unease, tightened its grip around her. It felt like the first ripple in a calm pond, a sign that something or someone was about to break the surface. The city lights of Viridian spread out below, a glittering, indifferent tapestry. Dominic Rossi stood by the vast windows of his penthouse, the hum of the metropolis a distant murmur. He felt no peace, only a taut, coiling tension in his gut that had gnawed at him for weeks. Eleanor Vance had vanished without a trace, and her absence was a gaping wound in the meticulously ordered world he commanded. He gripped a glass of amber liquid, the ice silent against the crystal. Her face, framed by practical blonde hair, drifted through his mind. He recalled the gentle efficiency of her hands, the surprising strength in her touch, the way her blue eyes held a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher, even as they met his challenging gaze. She had saved his life, a fact that both intrigued and infuriated him. No one walked away from Dominic Rossi without consequence. Yet she had. "Any progress, Marco?" Dominic's voice was low, cutting through the silence of the opulent living space. Marco Volkov, his most trusted man, stood a few paces behind him, a shadow in the dim light. Marco was a man of few words, but his reports were always precise, devoid of emotion. This time, however, his usual composure seemed strained. "Nothing new, sir," Marco replied, his voice flat. "We've checked every hospital in the tri-state area, every nursing registry. Her bank accounts are dormant. Her phone is off, untraceable. It's like she never existed outside St. Jude's. Dominic turned, his dark eyes narrowed. He felt a familiar surge of anger, but beneath it was something colder, more persistent. It was an unfamiliar ache, a hollow space he hadn't known was there until she left. He was accustomed to control, to knowing every move, every weakness of those around him. Eleanor Vance, the unassuming trauma nurse, had defied all his expectations. She was an anomaly. He walked to a large, polished mahogany table, running a finger over its cool surface. Her friends? Colleagues? The woman she shared a shift with? Sarah Jenkins? Sarah Jenkins says she hasn't heard from Eleanor since the day she left St. Jude's, Marco stated, a faint hint of skepticism in his tone. She claims Eleanor mentioned wanting a change, a new start, but nothing specific. We pressured her. She held firm. She's either a very good liar or genuinely doesn't know. Dominic scoffed, a humorless sound. He knew human nature. Most people broke under pressure. Sarah Jenkins was either fiercely loyal or truly ignorant. He considered the possibility that Eleanor had simply walked away, found a new life. But that didn't sit right. There was an unfinished quality to their last encounter, a tension that hinted at more than just a job completed. He remembered the faint blush on her cheeks when he'd looked at her a certain way, the way her breath had hitched. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible response, but he had noticed it. He noticed everything. He paced the length of the room, his mind racing, connecting disparate fragments. He thought of her quiet strength as she tended to his wounds, the concern in her eyes that seemed utterly genuine. He remembered the sterile smell of antiseptic mixed with her faint, clean scent. Those memories, once insignificant, now clung to him, a strange, persistent perfume in his mind. He found himself replaying their hushed conversations, searching for clues, for any hint of where she might go. He remembered her dedication to her patients, her unwavering moral compass. Such a woman didn't just disappear on a whim. Expand the search, Dominic commanded, his voice growing harder. Go wider. Think beyond the usual patterns. Someone like Eleanor Vance, a trauma nurse, she needs to work. She needs to help people. Where do people go for a fresh start, away from the city, but still needing her skills? Marco simply nodded, his face unreadable. He had seen this possessive intensity in Dominic before, but usually directed at business rivals or those who crossed the family. This time it was different. It was personal, fueled by an emotion Marco couldn't categorize, a simmering fire that burned in his boss's eyes. The days bled into weeks, each one dragging an invisible chain of frustration behind it. Dominic found himself distracted, his focus on the vast, sprawling empire he controlled fractured by the constant thought of Eleanor. He would be in the middle of a high-stakes negotiation or reviewing complex financial reports, and her face would appear, a ghost in his periphery. He'd clench his jaw, the heavy signet ring on his finger digging into his palm. It was an unsettling sensation, this loss of control, this obsession with a woman who was, by all accounts, merely a nurse he had hired. He commissioned a team of private investigators, discreetly separate from his usual network, giving them only her name and a vague description. He had trusted Marco implicitly, but this felt different. This was an itch that needed a different kind of scratching. These new investigators, operating outside his normal channels, dug deeper into public records, social media, small-town newspapers, anything that might surface a Jane Doe trying to start fresh. The city, usually a source of power and information, now felt like a labyrinth, swallowing one small woman whole. One evening, Dominic found himself driving, not to a meeting, not to a family gathering, but aimlessly through the familiar, gritty streets of Viridian City. The urge to revisit St. Jude's Trauma Center was a phantom hand on his shoulder. He parked several blocks away, the sleek black car an anonymous shadow among the bustling night traffic. He walked, his long coat blending with the shadows, towards the hospital entrance. The automatic doors slid open with a whoosh, revealing the sterile, brightly lit lobby. The pervasive scent of antiseptic hit him, a sudden, sharp memory trigger. He avoided direct eye contact, moving with the practiced ease of someone who didn't want to be noticed. He took the elevator to the floor where his private room had been, the one Eleanor had managed with such quiet competence. The corridor was hushed, nurses moving with soft footsteps, the low murmur of conversations from behind closed doors. He found the room. It was occupied now, a different name on the chart, the door slightly ajar. He glanced inside. It was clean, efficient, but devoid of the subtle, almost imperceptible warmth Eleanor had brought to it. He remembered her careful notes, her even temperament, the way she would look at him with an unyielding professionalism that always seemed to mask something deeper. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing her there, adjusting the IV drip, checking his vitals. He could almost hear the soft rustle of her uniform, the faint click of her pen. He felt a deep, almost physical ache in his chest, a sensation entirely foreign to him. It wasn't love, he told himself, not in the way ordinary men experienced it. It was something darker, more elemental, a sense of something taken, something owed, a challenge. Sir? Marco's voice, a low rumble, brought him back to the present. Dominic opened his eyes. He hadn't realized Marco had followed him. Marco simply stood there, a silent sentinel, understanding without needing words. Dominic walked away from the empty room, the silence of the corridor amplifying the turmoil within him. She's out there, Marco, he stated, his voice barely a whisper, yet laced with an iron conviction. She can't just disappear. Not from me. His resolve hardened, crystallizing into a cold, unwavering determination. He would find her. He had to. The very fabric of his reality felt incomplete without understanding why she had gone. Back in the penthouse, the frustration was a living thing, pacing his mind. He reviewed the countless reports again, stacks of paper, digital files, all leading to the same dead end. No digital footprint, no paper trail, no confirmed sightings. Eleanor Vance had executed a vanishing act with unnerving precision. He found himself staring at the panoramic view of the city, imagining her somewhere within its sprawling embrace, or perhaps far beyond. The thought of her being truly gone, truly beyond his reach, was intolerable. It was an affront to his power, to his very nature. He called in every favor, leveraged every connection, both legitimate and illicit. His network of informants, usually a swift and efficient machine, groaned under the sheer breadth of the request. Find a ghost. Find a woman who had meticulously erased herself. The usual methods were yielding nothing. She hadn't run to family. She had no close relatives. She hadn't left a digital whisper. Her online presence was minimal. It was as if she had anticipated his pursuit, dismantling her life piece by piece. The unsettling void within him deepened. It wasn't just about his ego or the challenge of finding her. There was an unfamiliar emptiness, a nagging sense of something unfinished, something important left unspoken. He had never considered himself a man of deep emotional attachments, not beyond his family and the organization. But Eleanor had stirred something within him, a quiet recognition, a flicker of something almost tender in the sterile confines of his recovery room. He had dismissed it then, but now its absence gnawed at him. He found himself remembering the way she had gently chided him for trying to move too soon, the way her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when she smiled. It was an infuriating, intoxicating recollection. Marco, usually stoic, began to show the strain of Dominic's relentless demands. He worked through the nights, chasing down every rumor, every faint lead, only to report back with the same conclusion. Dead end. Each report fueled Dominic's agitation. He broke glasses, pounded his fist on expensive surfaces, but never directed his rage at Marco. He reserved his fury for the elusive woman who dared to slip through his fingers. He had made a silent vow then, lying in that hospital bed, that he would not forget the woman who had saved his life. He would not forget her now. Days turned into more weeks, stretching into months. The season began to shift in Viridian City, the crisp autumn air giving way to the biting cold of early winter. Dominic's obsession had become a quiet, constant hum beneath the surface of his daily life. He still managed his empire with ruthless efficiency, but a part of his mind was always searching, always waiting. He would often find himself gazing out at the night, the city lights reflecting in his dark, intense eyes, a profound sense of isolation settling over him. He knew he was looking for more than just a nurse. He was looking for an answer, for a connection he hadn't fully understood. even when it was right in front of him. Then, one cold Tuesday evening, as rain lashed against the penthouse windows, a flicker of something new appeared. Marco entered the room, his usual unruffled demeanor holding a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. He held a small, unmarked envelope. "Sir," Marco said, his voice quiet, "this arrived, hand-delivered to an old contact, with instructions to give it directly to you." Dominic took the envelope. It was plain, unassuming. His fingers tore it open with unexpected impatience. Inside was a single, folded piece of paper. There were no letterheads, no official stamps, just a neatly typed, short message. He read the words, his eyes scanning them quickly. Then again, more slowly. The rain drummed against the glass, but suddenly the sound faded into the background. A strange, cold hope, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to entertain for months, began to ignite within him. The message was brief, cryptic, and pointed. It spoke of a kind nurse with city hands in a small lakeside town, many hours outside Viridian City. It mentioned her quiet demeanor and a subtle, almost protective glow about her. Dominic clutched the paper, the words echoing in the sudden silence of the room. A small lakeside town, his dark eyes widened, a predatory glint returning to them. This was it. This was the first real lead. The ghost had left a whisper. The dark sedan was a sleek, almost predatory shape against the quiet backdrop of the lakeside town. Eleanor Vance was walking home from the clinic, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows, when she first saw it. Her breath hitched in her throat, a cold knot forming in her stomach. The vehicle was black, polished, with windows so darkly tinted they reflected nothing but the sky, exactly like the cars Dominic Rossi's men drove in Viridian City. She pulled the collar of her light jacket tighter, though the air was mild. Her heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She tried to convince herself it was merely an expensive car, a tourist, someone passing through this peaceful, forgotten corner of the world. But the car moved slowly, too slowly for a mere passerby, cruising past the small bakery, the antique shop, in the general store. It felt like a deliberate patrol, a silent, unsettling declaration. The scent of pine and fresh lake water, usually so calming, suddenly felt tainted, laced with the metallic tang of her rising fear. That night, sleep was an elusive guest. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside her window, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. She found herself peering through the curtains, her fingers gripping the fabric until her knuckles were white. The image of that car was burned into her mind, a stark reminder of the world she had fled. Her carefully constructed peace, the fragile anonymity she had nurtured, felt like it was crumbling around her, exposed and vulnerable. Her paranoia deepened with each passing day. A delivery truck pausing too long outside the clinic, a new face in the local diner, a distant, unfamiliar car engine. Every ordinary detail became a potential threat. Her blue eyes, usually so observant and kind, now held a haunted, watchful quality. Colleagues at the clinic noticed her jumpiness, the way she flinched at sudden noises. Dr. Bevins, a kindly general practitioner, asked if she was feeling unwell, attributing her pallor to the strains of late pregnancy. Eleanor offered vague, reassuring smiles, deflecting their concern with practiced ease. She found it harder to focus during patient consultations. Her mind would wander, replaying the slow, deliberate glide of that black sedan, imagining Marco Volkov's stern face behind the tinted glass. Her hands, usually so steady and precise when administering an injection or dressing a wound, sometimes trembled. She would grip her tarnished silver locket beneath her scrub top, rubbing its cool, smooth surface, as if drawing strength from the faded metal. But it offered little solace. The weight of the world and the child growing within her pressed down with increasing intensity. At home, the small rented cottage was her sanctuary and her cage. Her due date was drawing near, and the baby's movements were more pronounced now, strong kicks and gentle rolls that reminded her constantly of the new life she was bringing into this dangerous world. She had started to prepare a small nursery in the spare room. The walls, once a drab beige, were now painted a soft, calming cream, a color she hoped would bring peace to her child. She assembled the second-hand crib she had bought from a local consignment shop. her fingers tracing the smooth, worn wood. There was a small homemade mobile hanging above it, featuring felt clouds and stars. Each tiny onesie she folded and placed in the dresser drawer was touched with a poignant mix of hope and overwhelming sadness. The room smelled faintly of fresh paint, new cotton, and the faint, sweet scent of baby powder she had already purchased. It was meant to be a space of pure, unadulterated joy, a haven for her son, yet it felt like a silent declaration, a beacon that might guide her pursuers directly to her doorstep. This should be a happy time, she thought, her eyes welling up as she smoothed a tiny blanket. A time for excitement, for shared anticipation. Instead, it was a solitary vigil, a silent preparation for a battle she was ill-equipped to fight. She would whisper to her unborn child, her voice thick with emotion, promising safety, promising love, promising a world free from the shadows that loomed over her. But even as the words left her lips, she knew deep down that such promises were fragile, perhaps impossible to keep. Nights became an extended torture. Lying in the dim light of her bedroom, the quiet hum of the countryside outside amplified her fears. The rhythmic thumping of her own heart often masked the faint, distant sounds she strained to hear. Every passing car on the main road, every branch scraping against the windowpane, sparked a fresh wave of panic. She imagined Dominic's dark eyes, his unyielding resolve, the way he commanded a room without uttering a single word. He was a force of nature, and she was a lone leaf caught in his coming storm. She knew she couldn't protect her child from Dominic forever. The thought was a bitter, suffocating truth that clung to her like a shroud. How could she, a trauma nurse in a small clinic, stand against a man who commanded an empire? She pictured scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. Dominic appearing at the clinic, his presence silencing every murmur. Him taking the baby from her arms, his gaze cold and possessive. Her heart ached with a profound, desolate loneliness. There was no one here who truly understood the depth of the danger, the magnitude of the secret she carried. She longed for Sarah, for her pragmatic advice and unwavering support. But involving Sarah would only pull her friend into the dangerous orbit of Dominic Rossi, a risk Eleanor refused to take. So she endured her fear in silence, clutching the locket, the only tangible link to a past that felt increasingly distant and innocent. The silver felt cold against her skin, a constant, heavy reminder of all she had lost and all she stood to lose. As her due date loomed, the physical discomfort of her advanced pregnancy became almost unbearable. Her back ached constantly, her legs swelled, and every step felt like an immense effort. Braxton Hicks' contractions, once a curious sensation, now came with a frequency that kept her on edge, making her wonder if each one was the real thing. Her colleagues urged her to take time off, to rest, but she clung to her work. The clinic provided a much-needed distraction, a structured routine that momentarily pushed back the encroaching dread. The familiar scent of antiseptic, the hushed urgency of medical procedures, even the sterile white walls offered a strange comfort. They were a world she understood, a world where she had control, unlike the chaos that threatened to consume her personal life. She had meticulously packed a small bag with essentials for the local hospital, just in case. But the thought of facing labor alone in a strange small hospital, without the familiar faces of St. Jude's or the comforting presence of a friend, filled her with renewed dread. The anticipation of meeting her child, a moment she had yearned for, was now intertwined with an icy terror, a premonition of the dramatic upheaval it would bring. It was a Tuesday evening, quiet and still. She had just finished tidying the small nursery, adjusting the mobile once more. The cottage was dark, save for the soft glow of a single lamp. Eleanor was reaching for her glass of water, a dull ache throbbing in her lower back, when a sudden sharp pain seized her. It was unlike anything she had felt before, a deep, intense contraction that radiated through her abdomen. Her breath caught in her throat. She dropped the glass, which thankfully landed on the rug with a muffled thud. Her hands flew to her belly, instinctively cradling it. Another wave of pain followed almost immediately, more powerful than the first. She doubled over, her knees trembling, her vision blurring at the edges. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead. It's happening, she realized. a wave of stark, terrifying clarity washing over her. Now, here, alone, the fear was a living thing, coiling in her gut, mingling with the escalating contractions. The quiet house felt vast and empty around her, amplifying her isolation. She was going into labor, alone and terrified, far from any familiar face. The world narrowed to a searing, rhythmic pain, each wave pulling Eleanor further from her small, quiet life. She gripped the worn fabric of the armchair, knuckles white, her breath catching in ragged gasps. The air in the small living room felt thick and heavy, smelling faintly of old wood, and the potent, earthy scent of the herbal tea the midwife had given her. It was not the sterile, clinical smell of St. Jude's, but something wilder, more ancient. "Just breathe, dear," an older voice, calm as a still lake, murmured beside her. "You are doing beautifully." Agnes, the local midwife, a woman with kind, crinkled eyes and hands that felt like warm stones, dabbed a cool cloth on Eleanor's forehead. Eleanor focused on the damp coolness against her skin, on the faint scent of lavender clinging to Agnes's sleeve. This was it, the moment she had both yearned for and dreaded, arriving in the silent solitude of her new home. She closed her eyes, picturing the tiny life within her, a silent prayer forming on her lips for strength. Each contraction was a mountain she had to climb, pushing her to her limits, testing every fiber of her being. She imagined her own mother, lone sometimes too, facing such profound physical challenges with a quiet grace Eleanor now understood. A tear escaped and traced a path down her temple, cool against the heat of her skin. She wasn't just giving birth. She was shedding her old life, preparing to embrace a new existence entirely defined by this small, unborn soul. Hours blurred into an eternity of effort and raw sensation. The soft glow of the lamps did little to dispel the shadows dancing around the room, making familiar objects seem strange, almost watchful. Eleanor heard the gentle clinking of Agnes's instruments, the rustle of clean linens, and the steady, reassuring cadence of Agnes's breathing beside her. It was a symphony of quiet determination, a stark contrast to the frantic, high-tech environment where Eleanor usually saw new life enter the world. Here it was primal, elemental. Then a final guttural push, a release of tension that left her trembling and utterly spent. A new sound pierced the quiet, a raw, demanding cry that wasn't hers. Her eyes flew open, blurred with exhaustion and a sudden, profound shift in her entire world. Agnes held him, a small bundle of indignant life, slick and red, but perfect. The cry intensified, filling the small room, filling Eleanor's heart with something so immense it threatened to shatter her. He was here. He was real. Agnes carefully placed the warm, squirming infant onto Eleanor's chest. The warmth of his skin against hers was an electric shock, a connection so immediate and overwhelming it stole her breath. He stopped crying, turning his tiny head, instinctively searching. Eleanor's fingers, trembling with a mixture of awe and fear, stroked his impossibly soft hair. He smelled of newness, of milk, and something else, something uniquely his own. His tiny mouth latched on, a powerful, unwavering suckle that brought tears streaming down Eleanor's face. These were not tears of pain or fear, but of an absolute, consuming love she had never known possible. Every fiber of her being, every decision, every sacrifice led to this moment. This tiny creature, so fragile yet so strong, was hers. "A beautiful baby boy, Eleanor," Agnes whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Healthy and strong." Eleanor could only nod, her throat too tight for words. She gazed down at his perfect face, his eyes still closed, his small fists curled against her chest. He was a miniature Dominic, she realized with a pang, in the sharp line of his jaw, the dark fuzz of his hair. Yet he was also entirely himself, innocent and untainted. Her heart, so long a vessel for worry and solitude, now overflowed with a fierce, protective tenderness. She felt a profound, almost dizzying sense of rightness, despite everything. She held him close, rocking gently, a silent lullaby in her mind. His soft breathing against her skin was the only sound that mattered. The fear that had been her constant companion for months momentarily receded, replaced by this ocean of unshakable love. This was why she ran. This was why she endured. Leo, she whispered, the name feeling right on her tongue. His name is Leo. Agnes smiled, a knowing, gentle expression. Leo, a good, strong name. Eleanor nodded, holding her son even closer. Leo, meaning lion, for strength, for courage. He would need it. She had chosen it, hoping it would be a shield, a promise of resilience in a world that felt increasingly perilous. She looked at his peaceful face, so utterly unaware of the storm that had brewed around his arrival. He was innocent, pure. She vowed to keep him that way. The first few days with Leo were a blur of exhaustion and exhilarating joy. Eleanor discovered a depth of patience and tenderness she hadn't known she possessed. Every tiny yawn, every stretch, every cooing sound from Leo filled her with a wonder that chased away the lingering shadows of her fear. Her small home, once a silent refuge, now echoed with the soft sounds of new life, the gentle gurgle of a hungry baby, the rustle of blankets, the rhythmic creak of the rocking chair where she spent countless hours simply watching him sleep. She meticulously learned his cues, the subtle shifts in his breathing, the tiny movements of his hands that signaled hunger or discomfort, the scent of his baby shampoo, the feel of his soft skin, the quiet weight of him in her arms. These were the anchor points in her new solitary existence. She kept the tarnished silver locket, her mother's, clutched in her hand during night feedings, sometimes pressing it against Leo's forehead as if to transfer a layer of protection, a whisper of a simpler, safer past. It was a tangible link to a world she had left behind, a silent hope for the future she yearned to build for him. Yet even in these moments of profound tenderness, the shadow of Dominic loomed. It was a constant, almost physical ache in her chest, a dissonant note in the beautiful melody of motherhood. She found herself staring at Leo's profile, tracing the line of his nose, the curve of his lips, searching for the man she had run from. He was there, subtly, undeniably. The bittersweet reality pressed down on her. Leo would never know his father, or perhaps far worse, his father would find them. The thought sent a cold dread through her, chilling the warmth of her bond with Leo. How could she explain Dominic to her child? How could she shield Leo from a world of ruthless power, of unspoken threats, of the constant danger that was Dominic Rossi's legacy? She imagined Leo growing up, asking about his father. Would she tell him stories of a man he could never truly understand, a man who commanded fear and respect in equal measure? Or would she weave a protective fiction, a tale of a distant, kind man who simply could not be with them? The dilemma gnawed at her, a constant, low hum beneath the surface of her contentment. Sometimes she would watch him sleep, his little chest rising and falling with such innocence, and a fresh wave of sorrow would wash over her. Leo deserved a different life, a safer one. He deserved a father who could kiss his scraped knees without a bodyguard standing by, a father who wouldn't leave a trail of fear in his wake. Her heart ached for the family unit she could not give him, the normalcy that was forever out of reach. She knew Dominic, his possessiveness, his determination. He would never simply forget her. He was a man who owned what he desired, and Eleanor had, however briefly, been his. And now he had a son he didn't even know existed. The thought was a chilling premonition, a ticking clock in her carefully constructed peace. Every unfamiliar car that passed the clinic, every distant siren in the small town, every unexpected knock on her door sent a jolt of ice through her veins. She found herself scanning faces in the grocery store, her gaze lingering on men who possessed a certain intensity, a predatory stillness that reminded her of him. Paranoia was a constant companion, whispering doubts and fears into her ear, even as she smiled down at her son, burying her face in his soft hair. She often found herself clutching the locket, wishing for her mother's wisdom, for a strength beyond her own. How do you protect a child from an empire? How do you keep innocence pure in the face of such relentless, dangerous power? The questions had no answers, only the hollow echo of her own fear. She was a lone sentinel, guarding a tiny, vulnerable flame against an encroaching darkness. Days turned into weeks, marked by Leo's growth, by the new milestones of his tiny life. His first smile, his first gurgle of laughter, moments of pure, unadulterated joy that Eleanor clung to like lifelines. She cherished every second, knowing that this fragile piece could be shattered at any moment. She had built this small, secluded world for him, brick by painstaking brick, and she knew in her heart that she would defend it with every fiber of her being. Meanwhile, miles away, the relentless machinery of Dominic Rossi's world ground on. Marco Volkov sat in the passenger seat of the sleek black sedan, the GPS screen glowing faintly in the dim light of late afternoon. He double-checked the coordinates, the confirmation email from the anonymous source still fresh on his encrypted phone. The Lakeside Community Clinic. The address matched. He looked across at Dominic, who drove with a grim, focused intensity, his jaw set. Dominic hadn't spoken much since they left Viridian City, his silence a palpable weight in the car. But Marco could feel the coiled tension emanating from him, the dangerous anticipation. The boss wanted answers. He wanted the nurse. And Marco suspected, though he couldn't say why, that this trip was about more than just a missing employee. The outskirts of the lakeside town began to appear, the dense woods giving way to a scattering of houses, then a small main street lined with quaint shops. The air was cleaner here, carrying the faint scent of pine and fresh water, a stark contrast to the city's exhaust fumes. Dominic slowed the car, his eyes dark and piercing, meticulously scanning every face, every building they passed. He was a predator, closing in on his prey, unaware of the secret waiting for him, and a secret that would irrevocably alter his entire world. The clinic's usual hum, a gentle symphony of hushed voices and soft footsteps, died instantly. Dominic Rossi moved through the automatic glass doors, a dark, imposing silhouette against the bright, late-afternoon sun. His presence alone was a physical force, silencing the waiting room, turning heads, and drawing every breath into a sudden, terrified stillness. The air, which had smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, now carried the cold, sharp scent of impending storm. Eleanor stood at the reception desk, her back mostly to the entrance, explaining a prescription to a kind elderly woman. Her voice, usually calm and steady, felt impossibly distant, as if coming from another room. She felt a shift in the air, a prickling sensation on her skin, before she even saw him. The hairs on her arms stood on end, a primal warning system screaming within her. It was a sensation she knew, a shadow she had lived under for months. Then she turned, her breath caught, a shard of ice in her throat. There he was, larger than life, exactly as she remembered him, yet somehow more formidable. His dark suit was impeccable, a stark contrast to the clinic's pale blue walls. His eyes, dark and intense, scanned the room with an almost predatory focus, bypassing the startled faces until they landed on hers. A direct hit. Her heart slammed against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her fingers locked around the pen she held, the plastic digging into her skin. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, then another, his gaze never leaving her. Eleanor's mind raced, a chaotic scramble of terror and desperate calculation. He found me. After all this time, he found us. The elderly woman, sensing the sudden, dangerous shift, quickly gathered her bag and hurried away, casting a wide berth around the approaching figure. Dominic's eyes narrowed slightly as he drew closer, taking in her appearance. Her face was paler than he remembered, etched with a subtle weariness he hadn't seen before. Yet every line, every curve of her jaw was unmistakably hers. He had chased this image for months, this phantom presence that had haunted his every waking moment. A possessive, dangerous satisfaction flickered in his eyes, quickly masked by a cold, hard anger. Eleanor gripped the edge of the reception desk, the laminate cold against her trembling hands. Her vision blurred at the edges, a dizzying wave threatening to consume her. She could feel the tremor, starting in her knees, trying to climb its way up her spine. She fought it, channeling every ounce of her protective instinct into the wall of calm. He cannot know. He must not know. Then Dominic's gaze shifted, just for a moment, to the side of the reception desk. There, nestled close to Eleanor's leg, was a small, cream-colored baby carrier. It was simple, unassuming, but in the sudden, piercing silence of the clinic, it seemed to glow with an impossible, undeniable presence. A corner of a soft, patterned blanket peeked out, and beneath that blanket, a tiny, impossibly small hand, perfectly formed, curled in sleep. Eleanor watched his eyes, every muscle in her body tensing. She saw the initial flicker of confusion, then a dawning comprehension, slow and terrifying. His brow furrowed. He took another step, closer still, until he stood just on the other side of the counter, his imposing height casting a long shadow over her. The scent of his expensive cologne, powerful and distinct, filled her nostrils, suffocating her. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the quiet room. It wasn't a question, but a statement of undeniable fact, laced with a dangerous accusation. "You disappeared." His words hung in the air, heavy and menacing. Eleanor found her voice, a fragile whisper. "Dominic." The name felt alien on her tongue, forbidden. She glanced around the now empty waiting room, a silent plea for help that would never come. Every breath was a struggle, each beat of her heart a painful throb. She tried to make her face a blank mask, to betray nothing but her eyes, women and luminous with unshed tears, already told a story. He leaned slightly over the counter, invading her space, his intensity a physical pressure. "Why?" he demanded, his voice still low, but sharpened with an edge of steel. "Why did you run?" His question cut through her, a blade of injustice. "Why did I run? To protect myself. To protect him." A wave of desperate protectiveness surged through her, overriding the fear. She straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze with a defiant fire she didn't know she possessed. "I had my reasons," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, though it felt like a monumental effort. She willed him to look only at her, to ignore the small, vital presence beside her. She felt the warmth of the carrier against her calf, a constant, comforting reminder of the life she was fighting for. Dominic's jaw tightened, a muscle clenching along his sharp cheekbone. His dark eyes, which usually held such cold control, now burned with a mixture of anger and a strange, unfamiliar hurt. He was used to commanding, to being obeyed, not to being abandoned. "Reasons?" he scoffed, the sound devoid of humor. "You vanished without a trace. You walked away from everything." He swept a hand through the air, indicating the life she had left behind in Viridian City. Eleanor thought of the opulent penthouse, the quiet, unnerving luxury, the constant, suffocating awareness of his power. She thought of the whispers she'd heard, the ruthlessness she glimpsed beneath the polished facade. She thought of her frantic, desperate escape, the fear that had driven her across state lines. "Everything?" "I walked away from a cage." "I needed to," she insisted, her voice gaining a little strength. "It was complicated." Such a small word for such a monumental, life-altering decision, such a vast understatement for the terror and loneliness she had endured. His gaze flickered again, back to the baby carrier. This time it lingered. He tilted his head slightly, his expression shifting from anger to a bewildered curiosity. The small, impossibly perfect hand was still visible, resting on the soft blanket. He had seen many things in his life, many scenes of violence and consequence. But this small, vulnerable sight was entirely new. It did not fit into his world. It did not fit into her world, the one he had tried to draw her into. Eleanor followed his gaze, a cold dread washing over her. There was no hiding it now. Her carefully constructed anonymity, her fragile peace, everything was crumbling around her. She wanted to snatch the carrier, to run, to scream, to disappear again. But her feet felt rooted to the spot. Her hands clenched even tighter, her knuckles white. "What is that?" Dominic asked, his voice now lower, losing some of its aggressive edge, replaced by a deep, unsettling confusion. His eyes, usually so sharp and discerning, seemed to struggle to process the image before him. It was as if he was looking at something entirely foreign, something beyond his comprehension. Eleanor swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry, the words caught in her throat, a lump of fear and fierce pride. She couldn't lie, not when he was looking directly at it, at him. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken truths. She could feel the rapid thump of her pulse against her temples, a frantic rhythm. She could hear the faint, soft breathing of her son, oblivious in his sleep, a sound that usually brought her such profound peace, now brought only terror. Dominic took another step, rounding the counter, his movements slow and deliberate, as if moving through deep water. He reached out a hand, hesitating just inches from the carrier. His eyes, which had held such anger, such possessiveness toward her, now held a bewildered awe mixed with something else, something unreadable. His gaze swept over Eleanor's face, tracing the lines of fatigue, the undeniable changes to her body, changes he hadn't fully processed until this moment. The truth, stark and undeniable, began to etch itself onto his features. He looked at her, then at the carrier, then back at her, a silent, terrible dawning. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, stripping away his anger, his bravado, leaving only raw, visceral shock. His hand, which had been poised to touch the blanket, froze in midair. Eleanor felt the first tear escape, a hot trail down her cold cheek. Another followed, then another, a silent cascade of fear and grief for the life she had tried so desperately to protect. She watched his face, saw the moment the pieces clicked into place, saw the exact instant his world tilted on its axis. The clinic, the town, the gentle rhythm of her new life, all shattered. Dominic's gaze, wide and incredulous, dropped from her tear-filled eyes to the infant in the carrier, his voice a raw whisper, barely audible above the ringing in Eleanor's ears. Is he mine? Is he mine? Dominic's voice, a raw whisper, hung heavy in the quiet clinic air. Eleanor felt the words ripple through her like a cold current, shaking her to the core. Her body trembled, a tremor that started deep within her and ran down to her fingertips, making the laminated paper she held rustle faintly. The silence that followed his question was thick, suffocating, broken only by the soft, steady breathing of the infant nestled in the carrier beside her. Eleanor looked at Dominic, her blue eyes brimming with unshed tears, her vision blurred by the sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion. She swallowed hard, the dryness in her throat making her voice raspy. Yes, she managed, the single word a fragile admission. A tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek. Yes, he is your son. The truth, spoken aloud after months of fierce guarding, felt like a heavy stone lifted from her chest and simultaneously a new, crushing weight settling upon it. Her fingers tightened around the worn strap of the locket beneath her uniform, a silent plea for strength. Dominic's intense dark eyes, usually so controlled and unwavering, now held a flicker of something she had never seen before. Pure, unadulterated shock. His sharp features seemed to lose their usual couture definition, a brief moment of vulnerability crossing his face. He stood utterly still, like a statue carved from disbelief. The hum of the distant fluorescent lights, the only sound filling the space. The antiseptic scent of the clinic, usually a comfort, now felt like a stark reminder of the sterile world she had tried to build, a world now utterly shattered. Then the shock morphed. Eleanor saw a flash of anger, quick and hot, ignite in his gaze. It was a familiar look, one that had haunted her nightmares, a silent accusation of betrayal. He had been denied this knowledge, this fundamental truth. A deep crease appeared between his brows, pulling his dark hair back from his forehead. It was the anger of a man whose control had been utterly usurped, whose meticulously ordered world had been blindsided by a secret he could never have conceived. He took a step closer, his gaze fixed on the baby carrier, then back to Eleanor. Why? And his voice was low, each syllable heavy with suppressed fury. Why would you keep this from me? Eleanor flinched, pulling the carrier slightly closer to her body, a purely instinctive maternal gesture. To protect him, she whispered, her voice cracking. Her own heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. To protect him from your world, Dominic. She could taste the salt of her tears on her lips, a bitter testament to the loneliness she had endured. The weight of her secret, once her shield, now felt like a lead cloak. He stared at Leo, his eyes raking over the tiny sleeping form. A tiny hand, no bigger than a flower bud, lay curled outside the blanket. Dominic's hand, large and powerful, began to lift, a slow, deliberate movement towards the carrier. He was going to touch his son. Eleanor felt a jolt of terror, a primal fear seizing her. Her fingers locked around the handle of the carrier, pulling it sharply back, away from his reach. It was an impulsive, almost violent reaction, a visceral declaration of ownership and protection. A silent accusation hung in the air between them, sharp and undeniable. Her eyes, red-rimmed and resolute, met his. They spoke of every sleepless night, every anxious thought, every solitary moment of her pregnancy and motherhood. They told of the indignity, the casual dismissal, the terrifying reality of his power that had driven her to flee. He paused, his hand suspended in midair, a dark shadow crossing his face as he registered her defiant gesture. The air thickened with unspoken history, with raw, unaddressed wounds. "You think I would hurt my own child?" he asked, his voice now dangerously soft, though his eyes remained hard. "No," Eleanor countered, her breath catching in her chest. "I think your world would. I think your life, everything that surrounds you, would consume him. It would consume us both." She felt a renewed surge of the old humiliation, the memory of those days in his penthouse, when she was merely a means to his recovery, a fleeting presence easily forgotten. The plush carpets and silent walls of his opulent prison came back to her, a vivid, suffocating image. She remembered the way he had dismissed her after her work was done, the casual indifference that had stung more than any harsh word. She had been a tool, a temporary convenience in his powerful life, then discarded. To think that she, a humble nurse, could bear the child of a man like him, only to be cast aside, had been a bitter pill to swallow. The shame had burned, a quiet fire in her belly. "I was a ghost to you," she continued, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "After you healed, I was nothing, a brief moment in your life. What would become of a child born of that moment, a child caught between your world and my desperate attempt to escape it?" Her voice quivered with the ache of the past months, the profound loneliness she had carried. Every word was a testament to her suffering, her unwavering resolve to keep Leo safe. His jaw tightened, a muscle clenching beneath his tanned skin. He had seen himself as generous, as a man who paid his debts. But looking into her tear-streaked face, seeing the stark fear and raw pain in her eyes, he recognized the depth of her despair. He remembered their final encounter, the coldness of his dismissal, the quiet way she had left. He had seen it as an end to a transaction, not the severing of a bond that had unknowingly already been forged. The thought of her carrying his child, alone and terrified, gnawed at something deep within him, a place he rarely accessed. A strange, unfamiliar feeling stirred in Dominic's chest. It was a fierce, protective instinct, sharp and sudden, like a blow to the gut. This child, this tiny, vulnerable being, was his blood, his legacy. He had unknowingly walked through months of his life, oblivious to this profound truth. He had searched for Eleanor out of a possessive need for the woman who saved him, the woman who had stirred something primal within him. Now that possessiveness had a new, infinitely stronger focus. He looked around the small, unassuming clinic. The quiet efficiency, the modest surroundings, the scent of mild disinfectant. This was the world Eleanor had chosen for his son, a world devoid of the opulence and danger that defined his own. A world she believed was safe, a world she believed was necessary to shield his child from him. The thought was infuriating, yet a sliver of understanding, cold and unwelcome, pierced through his anger. "You left," he stated, his voice now flat, devoid of the earlier whisper or fury. "You ran without a word. You took my son from me before I even knew he existed." The injustice of it, from his perspective, was immense. He had been robbed, completely unaware. "I ran to save him," Eleanor insisted, her hand protectively stroking the soft blanket covering Leo. "To give him a chance at a normal life, a life away from bodyguards and shadowed meetings, away from the constant threat that hangs over your name." She felt a pang of guilt, knowing she had denied him the knowledge, but her conviction remained unshaken. Her choice had been born of desperate love and profound fear. She remembered the whispers at St. Jude's, the way doctors and nurses spoke of Dominic Rossi with hushed reverence and palpable fear. She remembered the sheer, brutal efficiency of his men, the chilling aura of control that emanated from him. She knew with every fiber of her being that his world was no place for an innocent child. The vision of Leo growing up surrounded by violence, suspicion, and the ever-present threat of retaliation twisted her gut. I imagined him growing up in that penthouse, she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. Silent, cold, surrounded by men who know only how to fight and kill. I saw him with no innocence, no joy, just the weight of your name and your dangerous life pressing down on him. I couldn't bear it, Dominic. I couldn't. The thought alone was enough to make her breath catch. Dominic's eyes scanned her face, searching for any hint of deceit, but found only raw, unflinching honesty. Her fear was real, her conviction absolute. He saw the circles under her eyes, the slight tremble in her hands, the tired strength that clung to her like a second skin. She had done this alone, faced it all for this child. The knowledge was a bitter taste in his mouth. A complex struggle played out on his face. The anger was still there, a burning ember, but beneath it, a new possessive resolve began to harden. This child was a Rossi, his child. And a Rossi, by definition, belonged in his world, under his protection, with his name. He might not have known he was a father, but now that he did, there was no turning back. His hand finally lowered, but his gaze remained fixed, unwavering, on the baby. A slow, almost imperceptible shift occurred in his posture. The shock had receded, the initial anger had cooled into something far more dangerous. A quiet, unyielding determination. He was not just a man processing a revelation. He was a man reclaiming what was his. The weight of his family, his legacy, now pressed down on him with a new urgency. He finally spoke, his voice no longer a whisper, no longer laced with fury. It was low, resonant, and utterly devoid of question. Each word was a definitive statement, a steel door slamming shut on any possibility of argument. His dark eyes, which had shown a moment of vulnerability, now shone with an unshakable resolve, a glint of the power she knew so well. His face hardened, the sharp lines of his jaw becoming more pronounced. His gaze locked onto Eleanor's, a silent battle of wills already beginning. "He's a Rossi," Dominic declared, his voice laced with an absolute chilling possessiveness. "You will not keep my son from me." Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat, a cold stone lodging itself in her chest. "He's a Rossi," Dominic had declared, his voice a low, chilling promise. "You will not keep my son from me." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute, stealing the last vestiges of the peaceful quiet from the small clinic reception area. Eleanor instinctively pulled Leo closer, her arms tightening around the baby carrier as if to shield him from the very air Dominic breathed. She felt the warmth of Leo's small body, heard his soft, even breathing, a stark contrast to the thundering of her own heart. The antiseptic scent of the clinic, usually a comfort, now felt clinical, sterile, echoing the cold calculation in Dominic's eyes. Dominic took a slow step forward, his gaze fixed on Leo. "This life," he began, a dismissive gesture sweeping across the modest clinic, "it is not enough for a Rossi, not for my son." Eleanor's mind reeled. He spoke of Leo as property, an extension of himself, not a fragile, innocent life she had painstakingly brought into the world, alone and terrified. Her fingers locked around the plastic handle of the carrier. She knew if she let go, she might drop it. A metallic taste of fear coated her tongue, making her mouth dry. "He is my son, too," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking despite her desperate attempt to sound strong. "And this life, it is safe, it is free." She looked around the small room at the worn but clean chairs, the cheerful, slightly faded posters on the wall, the gentle sunlight filtering through the window. Here Leo could grow up without shadows, without fear, without the constant threat that clung to Dominic like a second skin. She could smell the faint scent of lemon polish, usually a sign of care, but now it seemed to mock the deep-seated dread blooming in her stomach. Dominic's dark eyes met hers, unwavering. "Safe?" he scoffed, a low sound that vibrated through the quiet room. "You think you are safe. You think he is safe, hiding in this place? I found you, Eleanor. Do you truly believe anyone else would fail to find you if they wanted to?" His logic was brutal, undeniable. A cold shiver traced a path down her spine. His words were a physical blow, reminding her of the pervasive reach of his world, a world she had tried so desperately to escape. The quiet hum of the clinic's fluorescent lights seemed to intensify, buzzing with an unspoken threat. He continued, his voice softening just a fraction, a deceptive silkiness that sent new shivers through her. I offer you protection, resources you cannot even imagine. A life for Leo where he will want for nothing, where he will be truly secure. He spoke of security, but Eleanor heard only gilded cages. She envisioned the opulent penthouse she had seen in her brief, terrifying encounters with him, a place of immense wealth but also of profound isolation, overseen by men with watchful eyes and hands ready for violence. The memory of the opulent, silent rooms of his previous residence, the way her own footsteps had echoed too loudly, sent a fresh wave of panic through her. Protection? Eleanor countered, her voice gaining a desperate edge. From what? From whom? From you? Your world is built on threats, Dominic. On violence. I cannot raise my son in that kind of shadow. I will not. She imagined Leo growing up surrounded by men like Marco, always watchful, always armed, always ready to enforce Dominic's will. The thought made her stomach churn, a sickening blend of anger and despair. She could almost taste the stale air of fear she associated with him, a ghost of a past encounter. Dominic's jaw tightened. Do you truly think this quiet life of yours can protect him from everything? From the kind of dangers that exist, dangers I understand, dangers I can shield him from? He paused, letting his words sink in. He is my blood, Eleanor. He carries my name. That name alone will draw attention, whether you like it or not. I can give him power, a future. What can you give him here? A life of struggle, of anonymity, of constant, quiet fear that someone will find you. His words pierced through her carefully constructed defenses. Anonymity was exactly what she had sought. A quiet existence where Leo would be just a boy, not the son of a notorious figure. But Dominic was right. He had found her. If he could, others could too. A cold dread seeped into her bones. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, picturing Leo's innocent face, so pure and untouched. Could she truly protect him from the consequences of his birth? The heavy weight of the locket around her neck, a familiar comfort, felt like a cold stone against her skin now, a reminder of a simpler world that was slipping further and further away. You speak of protection, but you only offer to swallow us whole, Eleanor accused, her voice trembling with the effort to keep it steady. I chose this life for Leo. I chose peace. I chose freedom. Her gaze swept over the small waiting area again, seeking reassurance in its mundane familiarity. The old magazines on the table, the faint scent of stale coffee from the staff room. It was her sanctuary, her attempt at normalcy. Freedom? Dominic scoffed again, a sharp, humorless sound. There is no true freedom for those connected to my world, Eleanor. Only varying degrees of control. And control in my hands offers security. The kind of security you cannot possibly provide. He stepped closer, his imposing height and presence dwarfing her. The air around him seemed to crackle with an unspoken power, a silent demand. She could almost feel the heat radiating off him, a stark contrast to the sudden chill she felt. Eleanor's heart hammered. She could feel the fight draining from her, replaced by a suffocating sense of helplessness. Her autonomy, her fiercely guarded independence, was dissolving under his relentless assault. What about my choice, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What about what I want for my son? She looked into his dark, unyielding eyes, searching for a flicker of understanding, a hint of compassion. There was none, only an unshakable conviction. It was then that Marco stepped forward, his quiet approach startling Eleanor. He had been standing near the clinic's entrance, a silent, watchful shadow, observing the entire tense exchange. Now he was closer, his presence adding another layer of intimidation to the already suffocating atmosphere. His dark suit seemed to absorb the light, making him appear even more imposing. His gaze, usually impassive, held a calculating quality as he looked from Dominic to Eleanor, and then briefly, almost imperceptibly, to the baby in the carrier. There was no judgment, no emotion, just cold, focused observation. Marco didn't speak, but his presence was a clear endorsement of Dominic's position. It was a silent reinforcement of the sheer force and power Eleanor was up against. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her. It was not just Dominic, but his entire apparatus, his loyal, dangerous men. The small, peaceful clinic suddenly felt like a stage, brightly lit, with no escape from the unfolding drama. She could hear the faint sound of traffic from the distant road, a reminder of the outside world that felt impossibly far away. Eleanor, Dominic continued, his voice now lower, more insistent, cutting through her spiraling thoughts. This is not a negotiation. It is a reality. He is a Rossi. He belongs with me, in Viridian City, where he will have every advantage, every protection, where he will be raised as my son. The emphasis on my son was clear, a declaration of ownership that stripped her of her fundamental role. She clutched the locket again, the cold metal a small anchor in a turbulent sea. A desperate defiance flared within her. And what about me? What about my life? She finally managed to meet his gaze, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, blurring the edges of his resolute face. You expect me to just walk into your world? After everything? After the way you treated me? The memory of his cold dismissal, his casual cruelty after she had saved his life, still burned. The humiliation had been a raw wound, and now he expected her to return to the very source of that pain. Dominic's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. You will be provided for. You will live in comfort. You will be mother to my son. What more do you need? His tone suggested that her desires were trivial, secondary to the grand scheme of his plans for Leo. He didn't seem to grasp the concept of personal dignity, of autonomy, of a life lived on her own terms. The very air around him seemed to thicken with his unyielding will. I need my freedom, Dominic, she retorted, her voice rising slightly, startling Leo, who stirred faintly in his carrier. I need peace. I need to know my son is safe from the violence that follows you. She gestured around the clinic, a silent plea for him to see what she saw, to understand the value of this quiet existence. She could almost taste the fear, sharp and acrid, in the back of her throat. Dominic merely watched her, his expression unchanged. You will find peace within the security I offer. And as for freedom, Eleanor, some freedoms are too costly for a child. I will not have my son grow up under a constant shadow of uncertainty, of vulnerability. He was speaking of a different kind of safety, one bought with power and enforced by threat. It was a language she understood but profoundly feared. The light from the window seemed to dim, casting long, unsettling shadows across the room. He took another step, closing the distance between them until he was almost within touching distance. She could smell his expensive cologne, a scent that was both intoxicating and terrifying, a constant reminder of the dangerous world he inhabited. You will bring Leo to Viridian City, to my penthouse. It is the only place he will truly be safe, truly be provided for. His words were not an invitation. They were an order, delivered with the absolute authority of a king. Eleanor shook her head, tears finally overflowing, tracing warm paths down her cold cheeks. I cannot. I will not. Her voice was a broken whisper, the last vestiges of her resistance crumbling under the weight of his resolve. She felt a profound sense of loss, a premonition of everything she was about to lose. The quiet hum of the clinic seemed to mock her, a reminder of the peace that was about to be shattered. Dominic's expression hardened, his eyes turning as cold and unyielding as polished obsidian. He looked at her, then down at Leo, then back at her, his jaw set in a grim line. Marco, still standing silently nearby, seemed to shift almost imperceptibly, like a predator awaiting a command. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken threats. Eleanor's breath hitched again, anticipating the inevitable. She knew with a chilling certainty that her choices were about to vanish entirely. You have until dawn, Dominic stated, his voice devoid of any warmth, any trace of compromise. It was a pronouncement, a decree. You will pack your things, and you will be back in Viridian City with Leo, in my home. He paused, letting the words sink in, allowing their full weight to press down on her. The clinic, once her sanctuary, now felt like a trap, its walls closing in around her. His gaze was unwavering, piercing through her with a cold, absolute resolve. Or I will take what is mine by force. Eleanor's hands shook as she reached for her phone, the cold plastic a stark contrast to the burning fear in her chest. Dominic's words echoed a chilling promise of what he would do. She had only one person she could turn to, one lifeline in the sudden storm that had erupted around her. Her fingers fumbled, finally dialing the number she knew by heart. Sarah answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Eleanor, what is it? Are you all right?" "No, Sarah, no," Eleanor whispered, the words tumbling out in a torrent. She told her everything, the desperate flight, the hidden pregnancy, Leo's birth, and Dominic's terrifying reemergence. Tears streamed down her face, soaking the collar of her nightgown. She spoke of Dominic's chilling ultimatum, the threat to take her son if she refused to return. A long silence stretched between them, punctuated only by Eleanor's ragged breaths. Then Sarah's voice came back, firm and clear, or stripped of its initial sleepiness. "Eleanor, you have to think about Leo, only Leo." "But Sarah," Eleanor choked out, "his world, it's so dangerous. It's everything I ran from. I can't go back to that." "And what happens if you don't?" Sarah asked, her tone pragmatic, cutting through Eleanor's panic. "He will take Leo. You know he will. And then where will you be? Where will Leo be?" The questions hung heavy in the air, each one a hammer blow to Eleanor's already bruised heart. Sarah continued, her words echoing Eleanor's own deepest fears. "You've always put others first. Now you have to put your son first, even if it means sacrificing everything else, even your own freedom." Eleanor listened, nodding though Sarah could not see her. Sarah was right. There was no escape. Not anymore. Her only choice was to choose the path that kept her close to Leo, no matter how terrifying. The call ended, leaving Eleanor alone in the dark, the enormity of her decision pressing down on her. The night stretched out, long and cold. Eleanor could not sleep. Leo lay beside her, his small chest rising and falling with the soft rhythm of infant sleep. She watched him, his perfect, tiny features a silent testament to the love that had bloomed in her solitude. He was everything. He was her whole world, a fragile flame she had to protect at all costs. She walked to the window, pulling back the thin curtain. The street was quiet, shrouded in shadow. But then she saw it. A dark sedan, parked a little way down the road, almost imperceptible against the deeper gloom of the trees. A familiar, menacing shape. Dominic's car. He was out there, watching, waiting. A silent sentry, a constant reminder of his power and his absolute determination. His presence felt like a physical weight, pressing against the glass, suffocating the air in her small home. He was not just a man. He was a force, an inescapable destiny. Eleanor felt a cold dread seep into her bones. She had tried to run, to carve out a peaceful existence for herself and her son, but his world had reached out and pulled her back. It had always been inevitable. She imagined life with him, cloistered in that luxurious penthouse, a gilded cage. The constant fear, the hushed conversations, the men with cold eyes and hidden weapons. How could she raise Leo in such a place? How could she protect his innocence from the shadows that clung to Dominic Rossi? Her heart ached with the longing for the simple, quiet life she had built. The smell of antiseptic at the clinic, the soft babble of the lake. All of it now seemed impossibly far away, a dream shattered by a harsh reality. But then she thought of Leo, alone without her, at the mercy of a man she barely knew, a man who commanded fear and respect with equal measure. Dominic might be dangerous, but he was Leo's father, and he would ensure Leo's safety in his own brutal way if Eleanor was not there to temper it. The thought of being separated from Leo was a pain far deeper than any fear she felt for herself. It was an unbearable emptiness. Her fingers went to her neck, finding the familiar cool metal of the tarnished silver locket. She unclasped it, turning it over in her palm, tracing the faded engravings with her thumb. It was her mother's, a piece of a past that felt so distant now, a symbol of a life unburdened by such impossible choices. She clutched it tight, pressing it against her forehead, willing it to offer some clarity, some guidance from the spirits of her ancestors. What would her mother have done? What would any mother do when faced with protecting her child from a fate she herself could not bear? The answer, though painful, slowly solidified in her mind. Her own freedom, her peace, her dreams of a quiet life, they were secondary. Leo's future, his safety, his very existence depended on her. The decision was not one of choice, but of surrender, a profound, agonizing sacrifice. She would walk into the fire if it meant keeping her son safe, keeping him close. She would face Dominic Rossi and his dangerous world, armed only with her love for her child. As the first sliver of dawn painted the sky a pale, bruised violet, Eleanor made her heart-wrenching choice. She understood with a chilling certainty that her child's future, every breath Leo would take, now lay in Dominic's dangerous hands. Eleanor found no solace in the cold dawn, only a stark chill seeping into her bones. Her fingers locked around Leo, holding him close, hoping her grip could shield him. Resignation settled heavily, silencing hope. Her choice, a raw wound, now had to be lived. She gazed one last time at the Lakeside Community Clinic. The scent of antiseptic, once a comfort, now felt like a ghost of peace. The weathered wooden signs seemed to whisper farewell. Her sanctuary, her attempt at a normal life, was closing abruptly. She remembered her first day, full of cautious optimism, a sharp contrast to her despair. The waking town's faint sounds, a bird call, rustling leaves, seemed to mourn the life she left. Her decision pressed down, an ache in her chest. She yearned to run, to vanish with Leo, but Dominic's cold ultimatum held her fast. Leo's warm breath against her neck was all that mattered, his future tied to a dangerous man. Dominic stood by the sedan's open passenger door, his silhouette imposing against the brightening sky. His dark eyes watched her. No triumph showed, only a formidable presence. Marco stood behind him, a shadow confirming the inevitable. Eleanor breathed deeply, forcing her feet forward. Each step was a farewell, a surrender of the life she built. A single tear traced a cold path down her cheek. She left it, a silent testament to abandoned dreams and Leo's lost innocence. The car's engine hummed, a predatory, inescapable thrum. She reached the door, brushing the cold metal, and shivered. Dominic's strong hand guided her into the car. He said nothing. His touch held command and a fleeting tenderness, deepening her confusion. The luxury car's cool air smelled of leather, expensive and alien compared to her home. She settled, Leo clutched to her chest, his small body a fragile comfort. Dominic closed the door with a soft click, like a jail cell locking. He walked around to the driver's side. Marco slipped into the back seat, a silent sentinel. Eleanor glanced back, seeing two dark SUVs, full of men, pull out. They were an escort, a guard, a menacing reminder of her captivity. The journey began quietly. Only the engine's purr and Leo's murmurs broke the silence. Every mile widened the chasm between her and the clinic. The lakeside town's cottages and hills gave way to forests, then suburbs, then the highway's concrete. She watched the landscape, holding on to memories of green trees, soon replaced by buildings. She clutched the tarnished silver locket beneath her shirt. Its cool weight was a familiar comfort, an echo of her mother, a link to a distant past. She rubbed its surface, wishing for guidance, a sign she had chosen right for Leo. The locket remained silent, offering only cold metal. Dominic drove calmly, hands steady on the wheel, his profile impassive. He rarely looked at her, eyes on the road, yet his presence weighed on her. It was a possessive energy, a silent claim. She wondered if he felt doubt or remorse, but his face remained a mask. Fear for Leo was a relentless current. What world awaited him? How could she shield him from Dominic's darkness, the inherent violence of his life? Her innocent child was drawn into a vortex she had fought to escape. The thought was a sharp pang of despair. As the sun climbed, casting long shadows, Viridian City appeared on the horizon. First a haze, then the jagged skyline, piercing the sky like a crown. The sight stole her breath with profound dread. This was the city of her nightmares, where Dominic's power was absolute, waiting to consume her and Leo. The air grew heavy with exhaust fumes and the hum of countless lives. Nature's sounds gave way to traffic, horns, the cacophony of a sleepless metropolis. A knot tightened in her stomach. She felt insignificant, pulled back into a vast machine. Her cherished anonymity was gone, replaced by the certainty of being watched, known, controlled. Dominic's hand reached to the dashboard, adjusting the temperature. A mundane gesture, it held unspoken authority, asserting his control. He glanced at Leo, stirring, tiny fists batting the air. A quick flicker crossed Dominic's dark eyes. Unreadable, perhaps curiosity or nascent pride, it vanished fast. "He will be safe," Dominic's low, gravelly voice broke the long silence. It was a statement, a promise tinged with threat. Eleanor flinched, startled. She searched his eyes. "Safe from what, Dominic?" she whispered, defiance and exhaustion in her voice. "From your world, or the one I tried to save him from?" His jaw tightened. He offered no direct answer, his gaze fixed on the road. The silence grew heavier, filled with unspoken accusations and stark realities. Eleanor knew her words struck a nerve, but changed nothing. He would always believe his way. His protection was paramount. Vehicles transitioned from highway to city streets, slowing as buildings grew taller. Eleanor looked out, a sense of disassociation washing over her. Viridian City's familiar landmarks, once part of her life, now seemed alien, sinister. Glass facades reflected the gray sky, mirroring her turmoil. They entered a district of gleaming skyscrapers, piercing the clouds. The Obsidian Tower, Dominic's domain, rose above them, a dark monument to his power. Its sleek design, dark glass, and polished steel felt cold, uninviting, a modern fortress. Eleanor shivered. This was her new home, her gilded cage. The car glided into a discreet underground garage, its polished floor reflecting artificial lights. The air grew heavy with ozone and exhaust, a stark contrast to the lake's fresh air. Marco opened Eleanor's door with quiet efficiency, his face impassive. She stepped out, legs unsteady, arms still locked around Leo. Profound silence filled the garage, broken only by the soft click of doors as other vehicles stopped. Dominic stood before her, his height amplified by the cavernous garage. He gestured towards a private elevator, its chrome doors gleaming. The scale, unspoken security, meticulous detail spoke of immense power. This was not an apartment. It was a stronghold, a constructed empire. As they ascended, the elevator moved with silent grace, carrying them higher. Eleanor felt disembodied, watching herself in a dream. The city unfolded below, a glittering tapestry, but she saw only isolation. Her heart pounded with a frantic rhythm of fear. The elevator opened into a vast, opulent living space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a terrifying vista of Viridian City. The penthouse was impeccably furnished, minimalist luxury with rich textures. Despite its grandeur, it felt cold, devoid of warmth, like a museum. It smelled of expensive wood, faintly metallic, sterile. She noticed subtle cameras, discreet security panels, men in dark suits materializing from shadows. This was not a home. It was a command center, a place where every movement was observed. Eleanor felt a fresh wave of panic, her breath caught. Dominic led her further into the space, his hand on her back, a gesture of ownership. Their footsteps echoed on polished marble. Leo whimpered, sensing the change, nestling closer. She hugged him tighter, her only anchor in this alien environment. They reached heavy carved double doors. Dominic opened them, revealing a large, beautifully appointed nursery. It was filled with state-of-the-art furniture and clinical calm. Meticulously prepared, it felt impersonal, lacking a home's loving clutter. Eleanor stared, her mind reeling. He had prepared. Dominic watched her, his expression unreadable, a silent expectation in the air. She stepped inside, carpet muffling her steps. Her eyes scanned the room. Pristine white crib, rocking chair, shelves of untouched toys. A perfect, sterile space, a golden cage for her son. A profound weariness settled over her. She turned to Dominic, her eyes filled with unspoken accusation, a desperate question about their future. He met her gaze, dark eyes unwavering, betraying nothing. Then Marco stepped forward, closing the heavy penthouse doors with a soft thud. The sound was definitive, absolute. It sealed their fate, trapping Eleanor and Leo within Dominic's domain, a world she knew held no escape. The heavy doors of the penthouse closed with a soft, final thud, a sound that echoed not through the opulent space but deep within Eleanor's chest. The air, filtered and cool, smelled faintly of polished wood and something clean, almost sterile. She held Leo tight against her, his small weight a fragile anchor in this vast, alien world. Every surface gleamed, every corner seemed to hold an unspoken expectation. She felt the silent gaze of Marco, standing by the entrance, and knew she was not merely a guest, but a carefully monitored prisoner. Her first weeks blurred into a haze of quiet desperation and hypervigilance. The penthouse was immense, offering panoramic views of Viridian City, a dizzying tapestry of lights and shadows that felt both distant and overwhelmingly close. She spent her days in Leo's nursery, a room lavishly appointed with soft rugs and custom-made furniture, a stark contrast to the small, hand-built crib she had prepared in her quiet lakeside home. The quiet hum of the building's sophisticated systems was a constant companion, a subtle reminder of the power that encased them. Eleanor found herself constantly searching for hidden cameras, for unseen eyes, though she knew Marco and his men were a more immediate physical presence. She fed Leo, changed him, whispered lullabies that felt like prayers. His soft skin against her cheek was the only real thing in this gilded cage. She learned the rhythms of the penthouse, the hushed footsteps of the staff, the distant clang of the elevator, the moments when Dominic Rossi would arrive or depart. His presence was a palpable shift in the atmosphere, a tightening in Eleanor's chest. He moved through the penthouse like a king in his castle, his dark suits and quiet authority filling the space. Their interactions were stiff, formal, always about Leo. He would ask about the baby's feeding schedule, his sleep, his health, his voice low and precise. Eleanor would answer with clipped, factual responses, her eyes never quite meeting his. She felt a burning resentment, a constant ache for the simple freedom she had lost, for the fresh air and open spaces of the clinic by the lake. One afternoon, Leo was fussing, his tiny face red with frustration, when Dominic walked in. Eleanor was trying to soothe him, her own nerves frayed. Dominic stood in the doorway watching, his dark eyes unreadable. Eleanor braced herself for a sharp word, a cutting remark about her inability to quiet his son. Instead, he simply walked closer, his presence commanding yet unexpectedly gentle. He extended a hand, large and scarred, and tentatively touched Leo's cheek. The baby, surprisingly, quieted for a moment, his gaze fixed on Dominic's intense face. Eleanor's breath hitched. She saw a flicker of something in Dominic's eyes, something she could not quite name. It was not kindness, not tenderness, not yet, but a raw, unvarnished curiosity, a nascent connection. He cleared his throat, a deep rumble. "He is small," Dominic said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, almost a whisper, "but strong." Eleanor simply nodded, her throat suddenly tight. Days turned into weeks, and those weeks into months. Dominic began to spend more time in Leo's nursery. He would sit in a plush armchair, observing Eleanor as she cared for their son. Sometimes he would ask questions about Leo's development, about what his tiny movements meant. Eleanor found herself answering, despite her initial resistance. It was for Leo, she told herself. He deserved to know his father, even this dangerous man. She watched him closely, always wary, yet unable to ignore the subtle changes. Dominic, the ruthless boss, would sometimes hold Leo. His large hands, accustomed to power and control, were surprisingly steady as they supported the baby's head. Leo would coo, sometimes even smile, at the dark, intense face above him. Eleanor saw a vulnerability in Dominic's expression then, a softness around his usually hard eyes that she never would have believed possible. It was a side of him that existed solely for his son. One evening, Leo was particularly restless, and Eleanor was exhausted. Dominic had entered the nursery, as he often did before his late-night meetings. He watched Eleanor pace, gently bouncing Leo, singing a soft melody. Her voice was strained with fatigue. Without a word, Dominic took Leo from her arms. Eleanor tensed, ready to snatch him back, but Dominic merely settled the baby against his chest. He began to hum, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the quiet room. It was not a lullaby, but a wordless melody, ancient and comforting. Leo, almost instantly, grew still, his eyelids fluttering before finally closing in sleep. Eleanor stared, disbelief warring with a strange sense of something akin to awe. This was the man who had humiliated her, who had dragged her back into his dangerous world. Yet, in that moment, holding their son, he was simply a father. A tremor ran through her. It was a disturbing, unsettling realization. The lines she had drawn, so stark and clear, were beginning to blur. Their conversations began to extend beyond Leo's immediate needs. Dominic would sometimes speak of the city, of the intricate web of influence and power he commanded, not boasting but explaining, almost as if he were trying to show her the contours of their shared reality. Eleanor surprisingly found herself listening. She saw the keen intelligence behind his ruthless exterior, the strategic mind that maintained his formidable empire. He was a man of immense control, and that control, she realized, extended to every aspect of his world, including his son's safety. She would often find herself by the nursery window late at night, holding her tarnished silver locket, the cool metal of familiar comfort against her skin. She missed Sarah, missed the easy camaraderie, the simple life she had once known. But as she looked at Leo sleeping soundly in his crib, a profound understanding began to settle within her. This gilded cage, this dangerous protector, was now Leo's world too. And if it was Leo's world, it had to be hers. Her protectiveness of Leo intensified, but it also began to encompass her new reality. She started to learn the names of the men who guarded the penthouse, recognizing their faces, understanding their patterns. She observed Marco, quiet and ever-present, his loyalty to Dominic absolute. She saw how Dominic commanded respect, not just through fear, but through an unwavering commitment to his own. It was a distorted, perilous form of loyalty, but it was loyalty nonetheless. There were moments of genuine, unexpected peace. Watching Leo laugh, a bright, unburdened sound that pierced the penthouse's quiet. Seeing Dominic smile, a rare, almost shy curving of his lips, when Leo reached for him. These moments were like flashes of sunlight through storm clouds, brief but intensely bright. They were not enough to erase her fear, but they were enough to reshape it, to temper it with something else. Her feelings for Dominic became a complex tapestry she struggled to unravel. There was still fear, a deep-seated apprehension of his power and his world. There was resentment for her lost freedom. But there was also a grudging respect for his dedication to Leo, an acknowledgement of his intelligence and his capacity for a fierce, albeit possessive, protectiveness. And in the quiet moments, a strange, undeniable emotional bond had begun to form between them, woven from sleepless nights, shared anxieties, and the profound, silent miracle of their son. Eleanor realized that this was not a life she had chosen, but it was the life that had chosen her. Thrust upon her by a single, desperate act of saving, her love for Leo was the force that had pulled her deep into this labyrinth, and it was the same love that now demanded her acceptance of it. She could not fight Dominic, not truly, not without sacrificing Leo's security, perhaps even his life. She had to navigate, to survive, to protect. One afternoon, several months into their new existence, Eleanor found Dominic in Leo's nursery, holding their son. Leo was babbling, reaching for Dominic's signet ring, the heavy gold gleaming on his finger. Dominic's dark eyes met hers over Leo's head. There was no anger there, no demand, only a quiet understanding. It was a moment without words, yet it communicated everything. He was Leo's father, she was Leo's mother, and their lives were now irrevocably intertwined. Eleanor understood that her dreams of a simple, peaceful life by the lake were gone, replaced by the glittering, dangerous reality of Viridian City. Her freedom, her autonomy, had been compromised, perhaps forever. But as she looked at Leo, nestled safely in his powerful father's arms, she knew she had made the only choice she could. Her sacrifice was not for nothing. It was for him. She walked to the immense window of the penthouse, the glass cool beneath her fingertips. Leo was stirring, and she gently took him from Dominic, settling his warm body against her. Viridian City spread out below them, a vast, indifferent ocean of concrete and light. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery hues, casting long shadows across the towering buildings. She watched a lone bird circle high above, free and unburdened. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, cool and quiet. It was a tear for the past, for the life she mourned, but it was also a tear for the profound, perilous connection that now bound her to this man, to this world, all for the sake of the tiny breathing warmth in her arms. This was her life now, and she would survive it. What would you have done? One line in the comments, let's argue it out together. Where did the story catch you? Which scene made you stop and think? A small like is a small move, but it's a big support for this channel. See you in the next story. Subscribe so you don't miss it.